So very good evening to one and all. Today is the last day of the webinar sessions that we are having as a part of the Andaman State Learning Week. The State Learning Week is from 18th now till 24th of March. It has been extended for a day. But however, today will be the last day of the webinar sessions that we are handling. And we are in the last webinar session. And before I go to the webinar session today, I would like to, first and foremost, I would like to introduce everyone to this Mission Karmayogi and its core component, the iGod platform. And we have successfully hosted 14 webinars, and we have expected immense participation from the government of Andaman as well. So before I go ahead, let me introduce the speaker. Professor Dr. Sanjukta Bhaduri is with us. She is a highly accomplished academician with over 39 years of experience at the prestigious School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. She has been the professor of urban planning at School of Planning and Architecture, Delhi, and has consistently demonstrated leadership through her numerous roles within the institution, including the former positions of Head of the Department, Urban Planning and Regional Planning, and Dean. And she has vast experience in the fields of urban planning, environmental planning, disaster studies, etc. And I can go on and on about ma'am. But she has two online courses on SWAYAM platform, that is the City and Metropolitan Planning, and also the Urban Disaster Risk and Disaster Mitigation. So, ma'am, I hand over the session to you.
Okay. Good afternoon to all. Thank you, Mission Karmayogi, for inviting me. And I will share my screen. And give me a moment. I have to share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So we come to resilient tourism infrastructure for Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Now, basically, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, if we see what are the characteristics of Andaman and Nicobar Islands, we see that it has natural assets. There are beaches, there are mangroves, forest reserves, coral reefs, marine life. There is historical and cultural assets. There are historical sites. And then there are indigenous tribes and traditions. Then arts and crafts, festivals, cuisines, museums and cultural centers. So there's a diversity and a various varied resources or assets which Andaman and Nicobar Islands have. So there are various things which the jail, which was very well known from many, from a decade back. So therefore, there are a lot of many assets which Andaman and Nicobar Islands have, or what we call as the tourism resources. So with this, when we see what it is, the picture, the glimpses of Andaman and Nicobar Islands, we see that there are a lot of tourism. Tourism is a major economic activity in these islands, and there is natural asset-based tourism. There's adventure sports. There's a visit to historical sites. People experience local culture, their traditions, cuisines, handicrafts, and who are the stakeholders in these in this industry, what we call as tourism. Today we call tourism as an industry. So what is this? Who are the stakeholders? So when we see, we have the stakeholders. We have the tourists, of course, of all age groups, income groups, and gender. We have local communities, which includes the indigenous population, then urban authorities, the municipalities, the rural authorities. Then, of course, we know that there is north and middle and south Andamans, and there are various, the islands are divided into various parts, and they have their inherent characteristics. But as an overall understanding, we know that these are the stakeholders. Then hotel and restaurant operators, tours and travel operators, service providers, law enforcement agencies, police, security personnel. So all these, and there others which are part of who are the stakeholders in this tourism industry. So when we talk of tourism, we see that tourism has been tourism infrastructure. What goes with tourism? When we talk of stakeholders in tourism, we also um, uh, discuss at the same time that what comes under tourism infrastructure. So we have accommodation, we have transport, we have tourists have to move, they have energy, we have water, we have waste management which needs to be taken care of, telecommunication is required, healthcare is required, safety and security are required. So all these becomes a part of the tourism infrastructure, and especially for islands, especially for Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which are also connected to the global, what we say, the other islands of the global south. So it has a very strategic location, and from all over the other islands and other mainland areas people come to, and therefore there are waterways, there are airways, there are roads which are part of the movement pattern of in these islands for the tourists. So when we look at the challenges which faces what this industry, of course tourism industry, as we already know that there are various islands which are today talking of capacity, talking of carrying capacity, because they are saying, like Canary Islands, they are saying, okay, we have to talk of, we cannot let tourists these many tourists come in. So they are, people are talking of carrying capacity based tourism. But let us I'm really not focusing on the carrying capacity based tourism, because let us see how this tourism is getting affected, or what are the challenges of tourism today. So especially from the disaster and the climate point of view. So my perspective is the disaster and the climate point of view. So earthquakes, tsunami, cyclones, heavy rainfall, floods, active mud volcano, there's a typo, it's a mud volcano, which is a part of characteristics of Andaman and Nicobar Islands, sea level rise, changing temperatures, landslides. So all these are, there are multiple hazards, and as well as the risks are also that much high, because if the capacity is not there, if we really do not have the capacity to combat this multi-hazard profile of these islands, then the risk mounts. And so therefore we can see that there are different types of challenges which, from the disaster and climate change point of view, which these islands face. And if we can see that there are a lot of impacts, I'm really not going into those numbers, but because generally in islands, the deaths, the coastal areas, they are more vulnerable, people are more vulnerable, and their livelihoods, the infrastructure, everything are more vulnerable, especially for islands. Now, if we really look at the tourism as an economic activity, what sort of challenges it faces, we can see that there's, because of those problems which I said related to disaster and climate change, there's destruction of natural assets, historical and cultural assets on which the tourism is based. So ultimately, if we do not take initiatives for protecting our tourism infrastructure or our assets, then tourism cannot be sustained. So when we talk of sustainable tourism, we need to know on which basis, or on what basis, what is the premise of tourism. So if we lose the premise, then we cannot sustain our activity. So basically, climate change and all and disaster has affected this, and there have been deforestation, coral reef damage, impact on biodiversity, threat to the tribals or the indigenous population. Waste management is a problem. Freshwater retention problems are there, basically because of the salinity in the water, then encroachment on the CRZ and the vulnerable areas. There's a lot of development basically encroaches on the CRZ, or it comes up on the CRZ and on the vulnerable areas. So one has to see that it is from a holistic viewpoint. We have to really get a comprehensive viewpoint into understanding the situation from in its totality. So when we find out that there are, so apart from hazard, there are vulnerabilities and the risks which are, and there are impacts, and these sort of changes are happening in the islands. Now, the international mandates, if we see at the Sustainable Development Goals, the Sendai Framework and the Paris Agreement, Sustainable Development Goal 9.1, it has said that we should develop quality, reliable, sustainable, and resilient infrastructure, including regional transborder infrastructure to support economic development and human well-being. Because it is ultimately, if we have resilient infrastructure, or then sustainability, we can achieve sustainability. So that's one of the SDGs. Now, Sendai Framework, which is mainly related to disasters, which has talked of adopting, and priority 2 has talked of adopting and implementing national and local disaster risk reduction strategies, which is aimed at strengthening the economic, social, health, and environmental resilience. So both these SDGs and the Sendai Framework has talked of resilience and how we can achieve resilience. Paris Agreement, which is basically for climate change, it has COP21 talked of combating climate change and unleashing actions and investments towards a low carbon, resilient, and sustainable future. So strengthening the ability to deal with the impacts of climate change. So when we know that we international mandates, we all know that these mandates have been there. We have to align with these mandates. We have to work towards achieving these mandates. So keeping these in mind, we see that what is the need for this climate resilient infrastructure. When I said that tourism infrastructure is getting affected, there are challenges. So what is the need? Why do we have to do it? So basically, sustainable tourism, as we all know, it will lead to continuous prosperity. Sustainability talks about continuity. So continuous from today to tomorrow. So there's a continuity. So it leads to continuous prosperity. Whereas resilience involves managing the stresses or the shocks or unexpected events that disrupt the infrastructure. And most of these hazards are many times unexpected. Though we may have early warning systems, but they are just addressing only a part of that entire situation. So therefore, there are unexpected events that disrupt the infrastructure. And why? And resilience. Why resilience as a tool? Resilience is fundamental to supporting sustainability in tourism by protecting tourism infrastructure as well as natural resources, maintaining biodiversity, and not only in resources and biodiversity, but also in livelihoods. So that means it is the people are also impacted if we really work towards resilience. So that's therefore the need is, if we really look at it, the population or the people, the resources, the infrastructure, they are all linked together, and this is how they are all an integrated system. And if any part of the system we disrupt, then the entire system gets disrupted. So that we all know. So if we really look at if we continue with the need, we see that if we ensure climate change resilience of infrastructure, it will help, as I said earlier, it will protect lives and livelihoods. Then it will reduce the direct losses as a result of extreme weather events. It will play a key role in meeting the mitigation targets of the Paris Agreement, as pointed out before, and it will meet the development goals. So, and of course, the development goals are should work towards sustainability. So, sustainable development goals. And if we really look at the premise or the pillars, we can see that there are, for climate resilient infrastructure, or if we really want to work towards it, we should have risk mitigation and climate resilient policies, because there are already risk which is already there. Risk is continuing. So how do we mitigate the risk, and for existing development and for future development, how do we make those future development resilient? So risk mitigation and climate resilient policies, because we should start with the policies, because what is our policies? If for a city, if for an area, if for a region, our policy is what are the overarching goals and principles? Is it that we should have resilient development, we should have resilient and part of resilient development is also part of resilient infrastructure is a part of resilient development. So therefore this policies should be the starting point, and then we come down to the integrated risk reduction and climate resilient strategy. Now, from the policies, we come to the vision and the objectives. When we know that there are goals and principles, so from there we translate it into a vision and objectives. So which is, and where we try to integrate the risk reduction and climate resilience. So instead of looking it in silos, that whether we are in many a times we just look at the resilience part and we really don't look at the risk reduction part. But here the need of the hour is to integrate both risk reduction and climate resilient strategy, and therefore translate it in terms of vision and objectives. From there, ultimately, whatever we do has a manifestation on ground, on land. Therefore, special plan or the infrastructure plan or development plan, land management, that is basically relating to utilization of land and space to support the goals and strategy. So whatever we have identified, how do we plan it out on the ground? Should we build on areas which are vulnerable or not suitable for development, or should we protect our areas which need conservation? So there are questions like this, and keeping those visions and objectives, that objectives may be protection of areas which need conservation. Objectives can be not developing on areas which are non-developable. So keeping these in mind, the plan needs to be prepared and land needs to be managed. And which talks of, when we talk of land management, we talk of land disposal, land development, land disposal. So all these are parts of land management. And then for land assembly, so all that comes under land management. Infrastructure projects, ultimately, when we have the plan, we have to execute the plan. So when we execute the plan, the infrastructure projects which are time-bound initiatives for implementation of the plan. So sort of a sequence is there, and which I'll come later, but the process. But these are some of the pillars or the on which the climate resilient infrastructure is based. Though risk reduction is not written here in the title, but risk reduction and climate resilience should go hand in hand. So when we come to the climate resilient infrastructure for sustainable tourism, climate proofing the existing systems. Today already we have the existing systems which are vulnerable. So there are, what are the tsunami and the disaster risk reduction strategies? There are various local oral traditions as early warning systems. There are indigenous communities. These are some case studies from where we can draw upon from best practices, how they survived the 2004 tsunami due to the Smong oral tradition, which taught people to flee to higher ground when the sea suddenly recedes. So therefore, there are certain ways or methods by which we can say, which are the traditional approaches which we can follow. Then there are nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions, which are mangrove forests and coral reefs, which are maintained by traditional coastal management systems. They act as natural barriers. So if we build upon, if we disrupt our mangroves, so then we are definitely making ourselves vulnerable to more and more storm surges and erosion and tsunamis. So therefore, mangrove forests and coral reefs, they basically act as our shield. So understanding these, so therefore protection of these areas, or what we call as ecotones, these are basically the ecotones which need to be protected, the cushions which need to be, which acts as our as I said, as our shield. So basically we climate proofing our existing systems. Then we have the tsunami and the so- sorry. So then we have the accommodation. When we talk of accommodation, when I said that tourism infrastructure or uh, has accommodation as a part of it, because tourists needs to come and stay. So if we really look at the what sort of accommodation can be resilient. So therefore, if we really look at Indonesia's traditional architecture, what they have done, if some best practices, because I drew up on some best practices to understand that whether we can really learn from examples. So Indonesia's traditional architecture, what they did is that they built on stilts to withstand floods, earthquakes. They use flexible materials like wood and bamboo. So basically the vernacular architecture on which, but many a times we forget this vernacular architecture and we go with modern materials and not so sustainable materials. Then there are elevated wooden structures that reduce earthquake impact and allow flood waters to pass underneath. So accommodations can be designed on the principles of vernacular architecture. So now we go to the next is the our flood and tsunami mitigation. Now there are many a times we see that how would the people move if the transportation system gets flooded? Then how would the people move from one place to another? So therefore, elevated transportation systems, many metro and rail lines which are built above the flood-prone zones. Then there are flood barriers, sea walls and flood barriers. So coastal expressways and railways are protected by them. Then water-resistant subway networks. Tokyo is a very good example how Tokyo subway systems have flood doors and pumping stations to prevent the water ingress. So how one can really address this flood and tsunami, the situation of flood and tsunami is through these the movement pattern, how we can ensure that movement continues, how we can ensure that the water gets the flood water gets dissipated and flood water does not accumulate. So therefore, all these, the subways, how they can be water resistant. So this is how we can go into flood and tsunami mitigation. Now there are there's another thing which we call as green infrastructure. Now green infrastructure is development of green spaces, the parks, the gardens, where we, like a sponge, they will absorb rainwater, they will regulate temperature, they'll become heat sinks, because heat sinks are, so green areas are not just absorbing rainwater, but also they are adding as or acting as heat sinks, and also they are improving the air quality. So how do we plan? When we plan, apart from conserving our areas, vulnerable areas, apart from not developing on vulnerable areas, where do we provide these green spaces? How many do we provide? How do we plan out for them? So these are basically required for the purposes of planning, or if we want to work out a master plan for the entire islands. Then we have the energy efficient technologies and renewable energy sources, use of renewable energy sources, solar panels, wind power, hydropower, smart lighting. So all these can be used and developed. Or existing infrastructure can also be made smart. In many cases, existing infrastructure can be upgraded, new infrastructure can be built with these principles in mind. Then we come to the, if we see here, the transport systems, the disaster resilient transport networks Tokyo has a bus network, a train network, and a road network. So how they what they did, they tried to go in for multimodal transport networks. So if there is a which ensures alternative routes, if there is a damage somewhere, then how can we the with the principle of the people have to move, so the show must go on. So in such situations, the how do we go in for by how do we bypass the entire problem? So therefore, ensuring alternative routes in case of damage. Then underground elevated expressways. Tokyo have deep underground expressways, raised highways, so to mitigate flood and seismic risk. Then there's a multi-hazard adaptation. When we say that, how do we, one part of our, when we talk of infrastructure, climate resilient infrastructure, one is how do we adapt? And second is how do we, with the existing infrastructure, how do we adapt? And the second part is that how do we build new, which are more resilient? So multi-hazard adaptation. So infrastructure is not just designed to not just for earthquakes, but also typhoons, heavy snow, and tsunamis. But then for all weather conditions, basically for all weather conditions. Then promoting low carbon transportation, that is electric vehicles, public transportation, cycling to reach tourist destinations. So the entire islands can sort of think of providing. I mean, why only cars? Why to increase the carbon emissions? If we have to go in for low carbon, then we have to switch over from or transition to electric vehicles or public transportation or cycling. So then we come to the water and the waste, which are very important because, as I said earlier, tourism infrastructure, water management. When tourists come in, water, how do we provide for water? How do we manage the waste? So protection of water sources for access to safe and clean drinking water. Basically, for islands, as I said earlier, that safe and potable water is a problem. So therefore, how do we protect the water sources so that one can have safe and clean drinking water? And how we can have water saving technologies, water efficient fixtures, rainwater harvesting, wastewater treatment systems, grey water recycling to conserve water resources. There is this Balinese Subak system, which is a UNESCO recognized water management system that prevents soil erosion and ensures water resilience for tourism landscape. Because we have to also think that it is not only the urban areas which we are to think about, but we have to think of the other rest of the island, which is the rural part of the island also. So how does one manage water there? Because water is required for farming and for various purposes. Then development of drought resistant infrastructure and water management systems. Then comprehensive waste management plans, including recycling and composting programs to minimize pollution. So how do we how does one go about managing the waste? Because a lot of, when tourists come in, one of the impacts which the tourists leave is which is visible is the waste. And the visible, non-visible, but invisible, but there are a lot of plastic wastes which are visible. And then so therefore wastes need to, how do we recycle, how do we manage the plastic waste becomes a very important area for for islands. Then there are cultural heritage, which is as we know that especially in Andaman and Nicobar Islands also there's there are cultural heritage, as I was referring. But this is a case of Borobudur temple, where how cultural heritage can be maintained as a tool for resilience. There are tourist attractions which integrate traditional water management to prevent damage, because so that the cultural or all the buildings, the old buildings, they do not get damaged, because these are the assets. So how do we protect our assets? One is providing water to people, and one is protecting the cultural heritage, protecting the built heritage from from maybe too much of water or heavy rainfall. And then what is this intangible knowledge for crisis recovery? After disasters, tourism communities use traditional storytelling and rituals to rebuild social cohesion and attract visitors. So this is one of the very important storytelling. It's also a part in which is also a part of the traditions in Andaman and Nicobar Island. Sorry. So now we come to the master planning part. We have talked of sectors, water, waste, uh, and then how do we go into those sectors of development. But then really when we transport, energy, those are the development sectors. But if we really want to put them under a comprehensive planning head, if we really want to have a master plan, which is all we call as a tourism development master plan. So which has a vision for, because if we can see here Indonesia, this is a case of Indonesia, which has done this sustainable tourism as recovery and resilience strategy, where they have they have a 15-year time period, for 15-year time period, a tourism development master plan, and for which the vision, which I was referring to earlier, the vision is of sustainable tourism, and that sustainable tourism, which is expected to support recovery from disasters, and like tourism, tsunami, and we already in the middle we had pandemic also in this time period, and enhance the resilience of tourism areas. So therefore, how do we plan out? So what has been done? So basically, sustainable tourism is seen as a way to improve the current approaches to tourism development and how we build greater resilience in the sector. So when we talk of tourism, if we see that tourism master plan, if we may see that there are areas when we can plan out, we can look at silos and we can say, okay, this site we have to develop. But then how does it connect? How does it fall how does it fit into the total picture of master planning for these entire islands? How does it, so it's better to come from the what we call as the whole to the part. So holistically looking at what sort of infrastructure the islands require, what sort of infrastructure the island have, and what is the challenges which they face, and how they what can be done to it as a part of the entire master planning strategy or master planning, basically. So if we see here, there's this indigenous land use planning and zoning. As I was talking about zoning, like coastal regulation zone is also a zone where we say that we should not build. We have our regulations, and we have CRZ 1, 2, 3, all that various we have these various recommendations or guidelines for these various areas. And then there are these sacred and no-build zones, so which I was referring to, that there's a philosophy which they had, which balances tourism development with nature, how to maintain green spaces. I was referring to the green spaces and how to protect water bodies. So therefore, how can these areas become no-build zones? We say that these are no-build zones, we protect them, we preserve them, we conserve them, because these are areas which are basically the assets on which tourism is built. People are going to these islands, or people visit to also there is nature-based tourism is there. Then coastal and mountainous risk awareness communities follow age-old zoning practices. They avoid construction too close to active volcanoes. There are mud volcanoes in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So one should not build too close to these active volcanoes or tsunami-prone beaches. So how do we identify? So the first thing, what we basically, when we say master planning, the first thing is to map. And we map special, that's why I said special planning. If we have to do a special planning, we need to map which are the vulnerable areas, which are areas which need, which are the no development zones. So mapping becomes our first priority if we have to say that where to build infrastructure, where not to build the infrastructure. So one has to, and where these no-build zones also, what sort of infrastructure do they require? Do they also require some sort of infrastructure? Not only are all these, we require some sort of infrastructure in the no-build zones also. So therefore, protection, how do we protect our mud flats? All these some nature-based solutions are there. So therefore, one has to go accordingly. Then community-led special plan, local knowledge. There is a lot of traditional knowledge which are there of hazard-prone areas, which one can integrate the sustainable this traditional knowledge of sustainability. And if we see here, these are the three. There is this human being. There is this God and environment. What are the three happiness causes, and how they conceptualized these areas, which are they permeate SUBAC members. They provide a strong interconnection between the material and the spiritual aspects of daily activities. So these sort of approaches we need to imbibe, so that we can have our cake and eat it too. That means we can have development also, and we can also protect our environment. So that is what the sustainable development has talked of, that how do we have development and environment going hand in hand. So how do we do? So with least or with minimum impact, how we can have development, and how we can have those development which can be the infrastructure development which can resist or absorb the shocks and get back to the previous pre-disaster state situation. So when we come to this management and governance, if we really look at management and so ultimately when we show that what needs to be done, but then how do we go about it? How do we? Is there any relationship between? Do we need to manage and govern climate resilient infrastructure? Yes, definitely. We need to maintain, manage, and monitor the existing infrastructure. We need to have infrastructure development which is resilient, built into all stages of the project life cycle. When I said that we should go in from policies to strategies to plans to projects. So resilience have to be also built into the stages of the project life cycle, and then resilience in the institutional and governance frameworks. It is all the stakeholders. I was referring, there's a type here again, stakeholders. When I say that there are stakeholders, I referred to the stakeholders earlier. So, but then stakeholders, if all the stakeholders work in silos, work without collaboration or without coordination with another stakeholder, then we cannot achieve anything. So it's basically working as a team, collaborating, coordinating. Then only we can achieve, or we can basically the climate resilient infrastructure, or climate resilient, what we call as development, because infrastructure is a part of development. Then public-private partnerships, how we can include the private partnerships here, the local community. Before I come to this awareness, the local community, why I've highlighted this, because local community involvement and engagement is needed for traditional knowledge. One can involve them, and we can empower the communities. There can be community-based tourism, there can be skill development, and awareness of the people, capacity building. There are many cases when I said that vulnerability hazards are there. It is a multi-hazard situation, context, the islands, and then the vulnerable. The resources are vulnerable, or the assets are natural assets, all the heritage, historical, culture, they are all vulnerable. People are vulnerable, communities are vulnerable. So how do we, and then their exposure is there. So really, when we look at disaster and climate change, the understanding of the disasters and climate change, so we also look at the capacities. So do we have the capacity to ward off? So that capacity will help us to become more resilient. So capacity building becomes a very important And capacity building for various stakeholders are different. So capacity building of a community, of individuals, of organizations, they are. So how do we go in for capacity building? This becomes very important. So now we go ahead with the next, which is a community-based tourism and resilient practices, which I was talking of, that government, that local people, how they, so what are the rituals and local wisdom, traditional ceremonies, where they reduce ecological pressure on tourism infrastructure by enforcing a full shutdown once a year. So how do they go ahead? How do they mitigate climate action? So how do they prevent? So basically with sustainable forest management, as I said, if you really have to have, if to have sustainable tourism, then how do you protect your resources? So for sustainable forest management, how they prevent and reduce deforestation, forest restoration, biodiversity conservation, local community productivity, and where there can be participation of indigenous people. And then there are a lot of, there should be prohibition of felling of trees, division. Many times there are prohibition, but there is no monitoring that whether this prohibition is being maintained or not. Where there are prohibition, who is looking into the fact that yes, they are the enforcing, basically enforcing the prohibition. So then division of forest utilization, regulation of the use of forest products, all these are activities that destroy forest and animals. So there are ways, there are customary laws for sustainable tourism, and there at various islands, traditional laws, they regulate tourism activities to protect natural and cultural heritage from overdevelopment. Too much of development, too much of infrastructure provision is also not good. So whether, when, as I said, carrying capacity is a tool, or one needs to consider carrying capacity for development. But with here I have not really looked into that, because I was looking into the climate change. So here, if you see the public awareness and preparedness, disaster response, I didn't focus on the curriculum. Then public awareness and preparedness, there are disaster response drills. There is awareness, how to generate awareness, evacuation routes, what can be the evacuation routes, the signages, the smartphone apps, alerts. So there are ways by which one can make aware the people and train them, and increase their capacity for protecting, for self-help. So if we come to the process, how do we achieve the climate resilient infrastructure, the process? So as I said, the policies and the visioning and the objectives, database generation. We really, many a times we want to achieve this, but there are these steps which we need to have, which is database generation. And these data is the climate and disaster data, which areas, especially if we look at the spatial context of this climate and disaster data, we may know that yes, so many people have died, or so many people have lost livelihood, but where can we map? Can we have a spatial context of this data and look at, okay, these areas that have been affected most, or these are the people who have been affected most. Then available tourism resources, where do we have, how many of them, where are they? So therefore mapping, this database generation in terms of special and non-special information becomes very, very important. Available tourism infrastructure, what is available right now, what we require for the future, because when we talk of sustainability, we also know that sustainability or sustainable development is also looking at the future. So what sort of in the future, for the future, what do we, how do we, or what needs to be done in the future? So how much should we provide? How many towers, maybe how many telecommunication towers should we provide? Where should we provide? So all these become, so therefore, without a basic data, we cannot forecast or we cannot estimate. So therefore, database generation is required. There are many more data which would be required, but this is sort of giving just a glimpse of that. Then the assessments, what sort of assessments we need to do? we need to do a hazard, vulnerability, exposure, and capacity assessment. That which areas, maybe the North Andamans, do they have more capacities, or the Middle Andamans, or the Southern? Because the Port Blair is the Southern. Presume that South Andamans maybe is better off than not maybe North Andamans. We do not know unless we really work out, we assess, and therefore so which is not based on presumption but a scientific assessment. Then a risk assessment, which is about environmental and social risks. Then the what we call as the impact assessment. Many a times impact assessments are not worked out. So the environmental impact assessment, the social impact assessment, when we today, social impact assessment is a part of LARR, the land acquisition, and which I said land management, which was a part of land management, is land acquisition, development, and disposal. So when we really look at these three areas, so social impact assessment is very much required, and the land suitability for infrastructure development, we have to work out the land suitability for the island specifically, which are the zones which to be buildable, which are not to be buildable. So all that land suitability, so mapping, and these assessments are also, and terms of special assessments need to be done, special as well as non-special. So then we come to that would bring us to the issues and I've not written that, but and to the potentials where we need to develop, and therefore potential areas for future development. One should identify, if we really have to have a master plan, then one has to look at which are the potential areas for future development, and then how much population, how much tourist population it can hold. So carrying capacity, all those assessments need to be done, and then planning strategies for existing infrastructure, that is adaptation, and for new development, the risk reduction and climate resilience, institutional and community and individual capacity building, and also innovation, how we can really have innovations and smart infrastructure. So when we talk of climate resilient, we can use the smart technologies and the innovative technologies in the process, in this strategy, as a part of the strategy. So therefore, if we really look at the process of mainstreaming, we have the vision, we have generation of database, we have analysis, and we have strategies for risk reduction, preparedness, and resilience. So I would end here. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. It was a very nice session for all of us. So I request my team to please share the QR code. One second, ma'am. Yeah. So, yeah, my team is going to share the QR code. So before that, I have few questions in my mind. One such is, ma'am, I understand a lot of crucial role is being played by the local communities in the island in preserving the environment as well as contributing to the income of the government. So, how do you think the government should facilitate this process of involving the local community participation in preserving the environment as well as the tourism?
There are various, very good examples of people of urban local bodies or rural bodies which engage with the population. There are various modes of doing it. Either you have a plan or you have a project, take it to the people, understand whether that project is really would be beneficial or not to them. That means you are bringing in a lot of transparency and trust. Otherwise something happens, and then many a times what happens is that between the between the people who are governing and the people who are governed, there's a lot of issues of trust. So the more what we call as good governance, that if you have transparency, if you go to the people, if you take their suggestions, if we really go their public parties, if we have a plan, suppose we have to have a master plan. So in that, or an infrastructure development plan. So if we really take it to the people and say that, see, this is where we want to do it, and these are the problems. So they may, I mean, it may come from them that, see, here, these are not critical. The critical infrastructure may be something else. So there are areas where one can engage with the people. Either you bring the people to you or you go to the people. So there are ways by which, by small public meetings, by going to having high footfall areas, putting up the plans, or going to these villages. So there are various modes. There are various best practices which all over the country where people have been, or what we call as inclusivity. We have, one has ensured inclusivity in plans on various parts of the world, not only
Right.
in islands.
Absolutely. Yes. Ma'am, one more question. So, as a country, how are we aligned in terms of disaster risk reduction, given the context of this entire framework?
Um, Disaster risk reduction, we have the our act, that every we need to have a disaster risk reduction plan. Every
Mhm.
state, from the state or utilities, we need to have disaster risk reduction plan. But then, we also have a legal, this is a legal, I will say, a legal path.
Mhm.
And but then there's also a legal path of master plan. Master plan is also legal. But then if two laws go side by side, uh, can we really show, do they look eye to eye, or do they not look eye to eye? Because many a times, or what we should do is that, how do we mainstream this when we know that there is another act, and then there are two acts. So whether these two acts should conflict, or they should come together and for a shared cause. That is, we have to reduce. So there are a lot of initiatives, but our main hindrance, I think, is that there are these two things which go. So from the DR point of view, we may do some things, but from the master plan point of view, we may do something. But why not mainstream it? So these sort of initiatives need to be. That's why I said that integration or
Mhm.
comprehensivity is required.
Right. We have one more question from the audience. What lessons from successful management of Mahakumbh 2024 can be applied in developing resilient tourism infrastructure in the islands, ensuring sustainability, disaster preparedness, and efficient resource management? Would you like to? Would you
Yes,
like?
actually,
Yes.
basically, what see, when a large amount of people gather in one
Mm.
area, of course, was did not look at carrying capacity, but generally there are islands which are looking at, which, that's why I said Kumbh was not, did not really think of, I mean, Kumbh was not a platform for really looking at carrying capacity, but
Correct.
there are islands all over the world, which who are talking of carrying capacity. But
Mm.
lessons that I'm not really now. I'm coming to your question. That the lessons learned from Kumbh can be water management. How did we manage the water? Water for such
Mm.
a, because water in islands, really fresh water is a problem.
Mm.
There are saline water intrusion in our coastal areas. Also, there is saline water intrusion. If you withdraw too much water, all saline water will get into your groundwater. So therefore, water, potable water, how do we manage potable water? That becomes a very big issue for, if we have too many people in the islands, first of all, as tourists or whatever
Correct.
then the waste, how do we manage? As I referred to the plastic waste, when the tourists comes in, today the seas are getting affected by plastic waste. It has come as a separate issue nowadays. Plastic waste are being researched, that how do we manage our plastic waste, and then what can we really do to the other waste, the sewage, or what we call as water, the wash sector, the water, the sewage and the drainage part. How do we really look at the drainage of the island? So those lessons we have to learn from, basically, from Kumbh, the water and the waste. How do we really, when so many people come in, it is really a big task to manage the water available, to ensure water availability, as well as manage the waste. The sewage, the all the waste which are also the waste which are the garbage, what we call as the garbage. So that is also one of the things which need to be done. And accommodation, regarding accommodation, when we really, as I said, vulnerable, because um, the Kumbh or the Prayagraj did not face the hazard of which the islands face. So learning from that, the context, there's something called a contextual applicability. Contextual, that means the context is different. I mean, didn't have the multiple hazard which the island faces. So apart from what the Kumbh had, or the solution which the Kumbh, the good solutions which came from the Kumbh, we have to add on the context of the islands. So it is not that we can just do a copy paste. We cannot. We have to apply to that context. That yes, this is in this context we have to apply the good principles of on which the services were delivered.
Right. Right. So thank you, ma'am. Thank you. That brings us to the end of the session, and thank you for such a informative session that you have conducted today. And on behalf of Karmayogi Bharat and the government of Andaman, I thank you a lot for accepting and taking time for us. That brings us to the end of all the webinars that we have conducted. So we have conducted successfully 15 webinars as a part of the State Learning Week of Andamans. However, these lectures are still available as recordings on the ICOT platform. So people who have not been able to attend this live can always go back to the platform and watch the recording and still get the certificate out of this. So we have 2 more days of Learning Week left, which gives you a lot of time to complete your courses. So please make sure that you complete the courses and the 4 hours of learning that is mandated and being monitored by your respective department. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, ma'am, once again. And thank you all for joining.
And thanks, Mission Karmayogi, for inviting me again. Again, thank
Right.
you.
Thank you, ma'am.